Hello, and welcome to another episode of On Books. This week on the show, we are talking about The Overstory. It's a book by Richard Powers that I just completed. It won the Pulitzer Prize for fiction in 2019, and it was recommended to me by a friend who said, just read the first chapter and you'll fall in love with this book. Just read the first chapter. And that's what I did, and that's what I'm going to do for you right now. I'm going to read the first chapter of the book. But before I do that, let me just give you a little taste of what The Overstory is about, and also to set up the reading I'm about to do. Okay, so if I was asked, what is The Overstory about? It's a good question, and it's difficult. It's almost difficult to say. If I had to summarize it, though, I would say The Overstory is a book about humanity as told through the eyes of a tree. More or less. Let me break that down a little bit. At first, when I started the book, I was a little confused because the book starts with 8 short stories, and I didn't expect that. It just kept starting over and over again, and I was like, why is this like Groundhog's Day? What's not quite that, but just all these stories. And it isn't until later in the book that you can start to see how these stories influence and intertwine with each other. And that's really well done and very beautiful. And one of the joining factors over the time and life of these characters is nature, and specifically trees. And I feel like we don't get to see that often. One of the things that in my life, and what I was drawn to the book about is I think time is really interesting. And looking at ourselves and characters over time, the influence that the generations before us had on our lives, which is great and often underappreciated. And then what we leave on the planet when we leave, a lot of us, we're busy, we're going to work and we're doing, a million things a minute on the internet that we don't necessarily have a lot of bandwidth to think about our influence after we leave this planet. And I think that's what's so beautiful about trees specifically, right? Is that they stand tall and for hundreds of years, and in some cases more than that, right? And I think this book does a really good job of that. In the first short story of the book, which I'm going to read to you completely in full, you're going to hear me read a story about a man who in the 1800s leaves Brooklyn and goes west with his new family to Iowa, which is, as you'll see, a very barren at the time. There's not a lot going on over there. A lot of land over there. And he plants a seed of a chestnut tree, which it's very far. There wasn't many chestnut trees over there, although there used to be plenty on the East Coast. And I'll go into a little bit about what actually happened in real life to the chestnut trees. And we'll get to see this tree grow and the influence it has on his family in the reading. And so that's what to expect. I hope you enjoy that. And I really enjoyed doing the reading, and I enjoyed reading the book. Here you go. This is the first chapter of The Overstory. The Overstory. We start with a short 2-page introduction here before we go into the first chapter. So that's what I'm going to read right now. First there was nothing. Then there was everything. Then, in a park above a western city after dusk, the air is raining messages. A woman sits on the ground, leaning against a pine. Its bark presses hard against her back, as hard as life. Its needles scent the air, and a force hums out in the heart of the wood. Her ear tunes down to the lowest frequencies. The tree is saying things in words before words. It says, "Sun and water are questions endlessly worth answering." It says, "A good answer must be reinvented many times from scratch." It says, "Every piece of earth needs a new way to grip it, There are more ways to branch than any cedar pencil will ever find. A thing can travel everywhere just by holding still. The woman does exactly that. Signals rain down around her like seeds. Talk runs far afield tonight. The bends in the Adlers speak of long ago disasters. Spikes of pale Chinaquapin flowers shake down their pollen. Soon they will return into spiny fruits. Poplars repeat the wind's gossip. Persimmons and walnuts set out their bribe, and rowans their blood-red clusters. Ancient oaks wave prophecies of future weather. The several hundred kinds of hawthorns laugh at the single name they're forced to share. Laurels insist that even death is nothing to lose sleep over. Something in the air scent commands the woman. Close your eyes and think of the willow. The weeping you see will be wrong. Picture an acacia thorn. Nothing in your thought will be sharp enough. What hovers right above you? What floats over your head right now? Trees even further away then join in. All the ways you imagine us, bewitched mangroves up on stilts, a nutmeg's inverted spade, gnarled Baja elephant trunk, and straight up missiles of a sal are always amputations. Your kind never sees us whole. You miss the half of it, and more. There's always much below ground as there is above. That's the trouble with people, their root problem. Life runs alongside them, unseen. Right here, right next. Creating the soil, cycling water, trading in nutrients, making weather, building atmosphere, feeding and curing and sheltering more kinds of creatures than people know how to count. A chorus of living wood sings to the woman. If your mind were only a slightly greener thing, we'd drown you in meaning. The pine she leans against says, listen, there's something you need to hear. All right, so that's the introduction. There's these first 2 pages, and I'm not going to pull it apart really at all too much, but just to say that I love, it feels as if it's trees. The trees are speaking, and then the flowers and all these plants are speaking as this woman, sits there. And I just love that image of, if trees could talk, all that they've seen and tree time over, decades, centuries before we ever came about. There's just so much there that this line he says, that's the trouble with people, their root problem. Life runs alongside them unseen. So just just such a feeling of like, just all of this around us. I mean, I'm the first to admit that, I can barely tell a pine from I don't know. I do know what a birch looks like, but you know what I mean? Like the different kinds of, this one line here that I just read, which was really nice. Several kinds of hawthorn laugh at the single name they're forced to share. Like, totally. Okay. So that's a wonderful intro. Let's read the first story, which is of the first character, Nicholas Hoel, and it's about 8 pages or so, maybe 8, maybe 10 pages, and it's really its own short story, which is I think what makes it really nice to just be able to listen to. I think it's kind of rewarding and beautiful just in of itself to hear and to read, but then it weaves itself for later in the book into other characters. But let's start here with Nicholas, and I'm going to start at the beginning of this chapter 1. Here we go. Now is the time of chestnuts. People are hurling stones at the giant trunks. The nuts fall all around them in a divine hail. It happens in countless places this Sunday, from Georgia to Maine. Up in Concord, Thoreau takes part. He feels he is casting rocks at a sentient being with a duller sense than his own, yet still a blood relation. Older trees are our parents, and our parents' parents, perchance. If you would learn the secrets of nature, you must practice more humanity. In Brooklyn, on Prospect Hill, the new arrival, Jorgen Hoel, Jorgen is spelled like Jorgen, if you're visual like I am and you want to, Jorgen, it's like Jorgen, kind of. I believe it's like a Danish or Norwegian name. So Jorgen Hoel Jorgen laughs at the hard rain his throws bring down. Each time his stone hits, food shakes down by the shovelful. Men dash about like thieves, stuffing caps, sacks, and trouser cuffs with their nuts freed from the echoing burrs. Here it is, the fabled free banquet of America, yet one more windfall in a country that takes even its scraps right from God's table. The Norwegian and his friend from the Brooklyn Navy Yard eat their bounty roasted over great bonfires in a clearing in the woods. The charred nuts are comforting beyond words, sweet and savory, rich as a honeyed potato, earthy and mysterious all at once. The bird husks prickle, but their no is more of a tease than any real barrier. The nuts want to slip free of their spiny protection. Each one volunteers to be eaten, so others might be spread far afield. That night, drunk on roasted chestnuts, Hoel, so Jorgen, proposes to V. Prowse, an Irish girl from the pine-framed row houses about 2 blocks from his tenement. So he proposes to her on the edge of Finntown. Finn, Finntown. Okay. No one within 3,000 miles has the right to object. They marry before Christmas. By February, they're Americans. In the spring, the chestnuts bloom again, long, shaggy, catkins waving in the wind like whitecaps on the glacious Hudson. Citizenship comes with a hunger for the uncut world. The couple assembles their movable goods and make the overland trip through the great tracts of eastern white pine into the dark beech forests of Ohio, across the Midwestern oak breaks, and out to the settlement near Fort Des Moines in the new state of Iowa. Whoa. Where the authorities give away land platted yesterday to anyone who will farm it. That's cool. That's pretty cool, though. Give me some land, I'll farm it. Their nearest neighbors are 2 miles away. Good Lord. Imagine that. 2 miles. And you didn't, did they even have a car back then? Like, how do you get 2 miles away? Like on a horse or something? I'm not sure. Let's keep reading. They plow. Okay, so they do. They plow and plant 4 dozen acres that first year. Good Lord. Corn, potatoes, and beans. The work is brutal, but theirs. Better than building ships for any country's navy. Then comes the prairie winter. Not sure what makes a winter different than a prairie winter. I guess it's just a winter on the prairie. I'm not sure. The cold tests their will to live. Nights in the gap-ridden cabin zero their blood. They must crack the ice in the water basin every morning just to splash their faces. Ouch. But they're young, free, and driven, the sole backers of their own existence. Winter doesn't kill them. Not yet. The blackest despair at the heart of them gets pressed to diamond. I do just need to say, like, why would anyone live somewhere where it's so cold that you have to break the water basin turns to frozen to ice and you have to break it just to splash water on your face. I mean, Florida's, kind of weird, but like maybe just go down south, right? Just go somewhere warmer. I don't quite understand it. I mean, nowadays, we have like heat in our houses and ways of staying warm. So it kind of, but back then it's like life or death. But as he writes here, winter doesn't kill them. So all right, keep going. And let's keep going. So when it's time to plant again, his wife, is pregnant. Hoel puts his ear to her belly. She laughs at the awe-slapped face. What is it saying? He answers in his blunt, thumping English, "Feed me." That May, Hoel discovers 6 chestnuts stuffed in the pockets of his smock he wore the day he proposed to his wife. He presses them into the earth of the western Iowa, on the treeless prairie around the cabin. The farm is hundreds of miles from the chestnut's native range, 1,000 from the chestnut feasts of Prospect Hill in Brooklyn. Each month, those green forests of the east grow harder for Hoel to remember. But this is America, where men and trees take the most surprising outings. Hoel plants, waters, and thinks. He thinks, one day my children will shake the trunks and eat for free. Their firstborn dies in infancy, killed by a thing that doesn't yet have a name. There are no microbes yet. God is the lone taker of children, snatching even placeholder souls from one world to the other, according to obscure timelines. One of the 6 chestnuts fails to sprout, but Jorgen Hoel keeps the surviving seeds alive. Life is a battle between the maker and his creation. Hoel grows expert at the fight. Keeping his trees going is trivial compared to the other wars he must wage each day. At the end of the first season, his fields are full, and the best of his seedlings stand over 2 feet tall. In former years, the Hoels have 3 children and the hint of a chestnut grove. The sprigs come up spindly, their brown stems lined with lenticels. I'm not sure what that is. The lush, scalloped, sawtoothed, spiny leaves dwarf the twigs they bud from. Aside from these starts and a few scattered bur oaks in the bottomlands, the homestead is an island in a grassy sea. The years unfold both fat and lean. Though their average tends towards runty, Jorgen detects an upward trend. Every year that he plows, he breaks more land, and the future Hoel labor pool keeps growing. Sees to that. The trees thicken like enchanted things. Chestnut is quick. By the time an ash has made a baseball bat, a chestnut has made a dresser. Cool. Bend over to look at a sapling and it'll put your eyes out. Fissures in the bark swirl like barber poles as the trunks twist upwards. In the wind that branches flicker between dark and paler greens. The globes of leaves spread out, seeking even more sun. They wave in the humid August, the way Hoel's wife will still sometimes shake free her once amber hair. By the time war comes again to the infant country, the 5 trunks have surpassed the one who planted them. The pitiless winter of 62 tries to take another baby. It settles for one of the trees, the oldest child. John destroys another the summer after. It never occurs to the boy that stripping half the leaves to use as play money might kill it. Hoel yanks his son's hair. How do you like it, He cracks the boy with his open palm. Vi must throw her body in between them to stop the beating. The draft arrives in 63. The young and single men go first. Jorgen Hoel, at 33 now, with a wife, small children, and a few hundred acres, gets deferred. He never does help preserve America. He has a smaller country to save. Back in Brooklyn, a poet nurse to the Union dying writes, A leaf of grass is no less than the journey work of the stars. Jorgen never reads these words. Words strike him as a ruse. His maize and beans and squash, all growing things alone, disclose the wordless mind of God. So just to pause for a second, I've read this before, but even kind of reading it now is like re-experiencing it. And, part of me was trying to put together the time frames, because I think time moves quickly, and it's a big theme of this book. The line, like, his wife still shakes free her once amber hair. Like, just this, this is kind of beautiful. This, like, this distance of time, and that is a symbol of it, as well as some of the symbols here of the war. And if you're listening and you didn't get all the hints, because sometimes when you're listening to audio, it's hard to go back, so just to go back, he's talking about the draft of 63, and that's 1863. And I think one pretty good, there's a few clues in there, but like, I mean, of course, like the Union, mentioning the Union is one. And then there's this line, a poet nurse to the Union, dying, writes, "A leaf of grass is no less than the journey work of the stars," which is, of course, Walt Whitman, who wrote, what's it called? I have it here, actually. Where is it? Oh, it's right here. How convenient. It's right on my shelf. So this is just the selective poems from Leaves of Grass, but you can't see it, but I actually have it just right here. Which is written, right around then, like in the mid 1800s, from Brooklyn. So yeah, some clues to the time frame there, which I think are helpful. This book is so rich there's just so much. It's like you could go back 10 times, and I feel like I can just pick up on new things. So continuing along, okay. So one more spring, and the 3 remaining trees burst out in a cream-colored flowers. The blooms smell acrid, gamey, sour, like old shoes or rank garments. Then comes a thimbleful of sweet nuts. Even that small harvest reminds the man and his exhausted wife of the falling manna that brought them together one night in the woods east of Brooklyn. "There will be bushels," Jorgen says. His mind is already making bread, coffee, soup, cakes, gravies, all of the delicacies that natives knew this tree could give. "We can sell the extras in town." Christmas presents for the neighbors, V decides. But it's the neighbors who must keep the Hoels alive in that year's brutal drought. One more chestnut dies of thirst in a season when not even the future can be spared a drop of water. Years pass. The brown trunk starts to gray. Lightning in a parched fall, with so few prairie targets tall enough to bother with, hits one of the remaining chestnut pair. Wood that might have been good for everything from candles to coffins goes up in flames. Oh, sorry, cradles. I was like, candles aren't made with wood. Okay, sorry. Crandles. Crandles, and that's a delicious candy I made up. Cradles to coffins goes up in flames. Not enough survives to make so much as a 3-legged stool. The sole remaining chestnut goes on flowering, but its blooms have no more blooms to answer to them. No mates exist for countless miles around, and a chestnut, though both male and female, will not serve itself. Yet still, this tree has a secret tucked into the thin, living cylinder beneath its bark. Its cells obey an ancient formula. Keep still. Wait. Something in the lone survivor knew that even the ironclad law of now can be outlasted. Ooh, nice. There's work to do, star work, but earthbound at the same. Or, as the nurse to the Union dead writes, "Stand cool and composed before a million universes, as cool and composed as wood." Blah. throwing in all these Walt Whitman quotes in here. Just like, man, who doesn't want to go read some Walt Whitman after that? I think that one's from Song of Myself, somewhere in there. You could look that up online after. Wow, that's a great ending to that paragraph. A few more pages in this chapter and keep going. So the farm survives the chaos of God's will. 2 years after Appomattox, between tilling, plowing, planting, roguing, weeding, and harvesting, Jorgen finishes the new house. Crops come in and are carried off. Hoel sons step into the traces along their ox-like father. Daughters disperse in marriage to nearby farms. Villages sprout up. The dirt track past the farm turns into a real road. The youngest son works in the Polk County's assessor's office. Polk County assessor's office. The middle boy becomes a banker in Ames. The eldest son, John, stays on the farm with his family and works it as his parents decline. Jorgen Hoel throws in with speed, progress, and machines. He buys a steam tractor that both plows and threshes, reaps and binds. It bellows as it works, like something set free from hell. For the last remaining chestnut, all this happens in a couple of new fissures, an inch of added rings. The tree bulks out. Its bark spirals up like a Trajan's column. Not Trojan, Trajan. I don't know what that is. Its scalloped leaves carry on, turning sunlight into tissue. It more than abides. The dude abides, and so does the tree. Sorry. It more than abides, it flourishes. A globe of green health and vigor. And in the 2nd June of the new century, here is Jorgen Hoel in bed in an oak-trimmed upstairs room of the house he built, a bedroom he can no longer leave, looking out the dormer window onto a school of leaves swimming and shining in the sky. His son's steam tractor hammers down in the North 40, but Jorgen Hoel mistakes the sounds for weather. The branches dapple him. Something about those green and toothy leaves, a dream he once had, a vision of increase and flourishing, causes a feast to fall all around his head again. He wonders, what makes the bark twist and swirl so, in a tree so straight and wide? Could it be the spinning of the earth? Is it trying to get the attention of men? 700 years before a chestnut in Sicily, 200 feet around, sheltered a Spanish queen and her husband mounted knights from a raging storm. That tree will outlive by 100 years or more the man who has never heard of it. Do you remember, Jorgen asks the woman who holds his hand, Prospect Hill? How we ate that night? He nods towards the leafy limbs, the land beyond. I gave you that. And you gave me all of this country, my life, my freedom. But the woman who holds his hand is not his wife. Via's died 5 years ago of infected lungs. Sleep now, his granddaughter tells him, and lays his hand back on his spent chest. We'll all just be downstairs. Jorgen Hoel buries his father beneath the chestnut the man planted. A 3-foot cast iron fence now surrounds the scattering of graves. The tree above casts a shade with equal generosity on the living and the dead. The trunk has grown too thick for John to embrace. The lowest skirt of surviving branches lifts out of reach. The whole chestnut becomes a landmark, what farmers call a sentinel tree. You know, like a guard or like a keeping watch sentinel tree. Families navigate by it on Sunday outings. Locals use it to direct travelers. The lone lighthouse in a grain-filled sea. The farm prospers. There's seed money now to breed and propagate. With his father gone and his brothers off on their own, Jorgen Hoel is free to chase after the latest machines. His equipment shed fills with reapers and winnowers and twine binders. He travels out to Charles City to see the first 2-cylinder gas-powered tractors. When phone lines come through, he subscribes, although it costs a fortune, and no one in the family can think what the thing might be good for. The immigrant's son yields to the disease of improvement years before there's an effective cure for it. He buys himself a Kodak #2 Brownie. You push the button, we do the rest. He must send the film to Des Moines for developing and printing, a process that soon costs many times more than the $2 camera. He photographs his wife in calico and a crumpled smile, poised over the new mechanical clothes mangle. He photographs his children running the combine and riding sway-backed draft horses along the field's headers. He photographs his family in their Easter finest, bound with bonnets and garroted by bow ties. When nothing else of his little postage stamp of Iowa is left to photograph, John turns his camera on the Hoel chestnut. His exact coeval. I didn't know what coeval meant. Coeval. Do you? Coeval? It means basically born at the same time or around the same time. So I guess what he's saying is, because they were more or less, John and the tree are the same age, is what he's saying. Maybe you knew that. I did not. Very nice. Okay, keep going. A few years before, he bought his youngest girl, this word, zoopraxiscope. What is a zoopraxiscope for her birthday? Though he alone kept playing with it after she grew bored. Okay, got it. Looked it up. Zoopraxiscope. Very cool, actually. It was basically if you take still photographs and then you, in succession, you make a movie. Like, Muybridge made the original idea of a film by flipping together stills of something. So that's what a zoopraxiscope is. Fascinating word. Okay. So he bought his youngest girl a zoopraxiscope for her birthday. Though he alone kept playing with it after she grew bored. So that makes more sense because he's into the cameras and he's taking. Okay, got it. Okay. Now those squadrons of flapping geese and parades of bucking broncos that come alive when this glass drum spins animate his brain. Ooh. A grand plan occurs to him as if he invented it. He decides, for whatever years are left in him, to capture the tree and see what the thing looks like sped up to the rate of human desire. He builds a tripod in the equipment shop. Then he sets a broken grinding stone on a rise near the house. And on the first day of spring, 1903, John Hoel positions the #2 Brownie, the Kodak, and takes a full-length portrait of the Sentinel tree leafing out. 1 month later, to the day, from the same spot at the same hour, he takes another. The 21st of every month finds him up on the rise. It becomes a ritual devotion. Even in the rain and the snow and the killing heat, his own private liturgy of the church of the spreading vegetative God. His wife teases him without mercy, as do the children. He's waiting for it to do something interesting. When he assembles the first year's 12 black and white prints and rifles them through with his thumb, they show precious little for his enterprise. In one instant, the tree makes leaves from nothing. In the next, it offers up everything to the thickening light. Otherwise, the branches merely endure. But farmers are patient men, tried by brutal seasons, and if they weren't plagued by dreams of generations, few would keep plowing, spring after spring. John Hoel is on his rise again, March 21st, 1904, as if he too might have another 100 years or two to document what time hides forever in plain sight. 1,200 miles east, in the city where John Hoel's mother sewed dresses and his father built ships, disaster hits before anyone knows it. The killer slips in the country from Asia, in the wood of Chinese chestnuts destined for fancy gardens. A tree in the Bronx Zoological Park turns October colors in July. Whoa. Leaves curl and scorch to the hue of cinnamon. Rings of orange spots spread across the swollen bark. At the slightest press, the wood caves in. So I'm just going to pause there for a second because what's coming up now fascinates me, and I didn't at all realize it the first time I read this. when I read it to myself, is that there was in North America, there was what they call the Chestnut Tree Blight, and you can look it up on Wikipedia, where in the 1900s, there was this disease that came from South America, South Asia, maybe Southeast Asia, I think it was, and killed the chestnut tree in North America, but not only just killed a few of them, basically eradicated the entire species from the northeast part of the United States, killing 4 billion trees. So something like what does it say here? 8 million acres, about 4 billion trees. So this, I mean, just picture, anything like New York State or Illinois, just picture these entire states that we have, and just the massive amount of billions of trees that took, many years to grow and to fill this area, being eradicated. So it's a true story, and you can read all about that. But I read through this the first time, not maybe quite appreciating how true and how just horrific this was. So that's what he's talking about here. I'm going to continue reading about that. Within a year, orange spots fleck chestnuts throughout the Bronx, the fruiting bodies of a parasite that has already killed its host. Every infection releases a horde of spores on the rain and wind. City gardeners mobilize a counterattack. They lop off infected branches and burn them. They spray trees with a lime and copper sulfite from horse-drawn wagons. All they do is spread the spores on the axes they use to cut the victims down. A researcher at the New York Botanical Garden identifies the killer as a fungus new to man. He publishes the results and leaves town to beat the summer heat. When he returns a few weeks later, not a chestnut in the city is worth saving. Death races across Connecticut and Massachusetts, jumping down dozens of miles a year. Trees succumb by the hundreds of thousands. A country watches dumbstruck as New England's priceless chestnuts melt away. The tree of the tanning industry, of railroad ties, train cars, telegraph poles, fuel, fences, houses, barns, fine desks, tables, pianos, crates, paper pulps, and endless free shades and food. The most harvested tree in the country is vanishing. Pennsylvania tries to cut a buffer hundreds of miles wide across the strait. In Virginia, on the northern edge of the country's richest chestnut forest, people call for a religious revival to purge the sin behind the plague. America's perfect tree, backbone of the entire rural economy, the limber, durable redwood of the East, with 36 industrial uses. Every fourth tree of a forest stretching 200 million acres from Maine down to the Gulf is doomed. News of the blight doesn't reach western Iowa. Jorgen Hoel returns to his rise on the 21st of each month, in all weather. The whole chestnut keeps lifting the high water mark of its leaves. It's after something, the farmer thinks, his lone venture into philosophy. It has a plan. On the night before his 56th birthday, John wakes up at 2 a.m. and feels around on the bed as if looking for something. His wife asks him, "What's wrong?" Through clenched teeth, he answers, "It'll pass." 8 minutes later, he's dead. The farm descends upon his first 2 sons. The elder, Carl, wants to write off the sunk cost of the photo ritual. Frank, the younger, needs to redeem his father's decade of obscure research by carrying it forward as stubbornly as the tree spread its crown. More than 100 frames long, the oldest, shortest, slowest, most ambitious silent movie ever shot in Iowa begins to reveal the tree's goal. A flip through the shots shows the subject stretching and padding about for something in the sky. A mate, perhaps. More light. Chestnut vindication. When America at last joins the world conflagration, Frank Hoel is sent to France with the 2nd Cavalry Regiment. He makes his 9-year-old son, Frank Jr., promise to keep taking pictures until his return. It's a year for long promises. What the boy lacks in imagination, he makes up for in obedience. Pure, dumb fate leads Frank Sr. out of the cauldron of Saint Mihiel, only to liquefy him with a mortar shell in the Argonne near Montfaucon. Apologize for my French pronunciations. There isn't enough left to put in a pine box and bury. Oof. Oh, heavy, right? The family makes a time capsule of his caps, pipes, and watches and sinks it in the family plot under the tree that he photographed every month for a too short while. If God had a brownie, he might shoot another animated short subject. Again, the brownie is the Kodak camera. So if God had a brownie, he might shoot another animated short subject. Blight hovering a moment before plunging down the Appalachians into the heart of chestnut country. The chestnuts up north were majestic, but the southern trees are gods. They form near pure stands for miles on end. In the Carolinas, boles older than America grow 10 feet wide and 120 feet tall. 10 feet wide and 120 feet tall. Whole forests of them flower in rolling clouds of white. Scores of mountain communities are built from the beautiful straight grain wood. A single tree might yield as many as 14,000 planks. The stalks of food that fall shin deep feed entire counties. Every year, a mast year. Now the gods are dying. All of them. The full force of human ingenuity can't stop the disaster breaking all over the continent. The blight runs along ridgelines, killing off peak after peak. A person perched on an overlook above the southern mountains can watch the trunk change to gray-white skeletons in a rippling wave. Loggers race through a dozen states to cut down whatever the fungus hasn't reached. The nascent Forest Service encourages them. Use the wood at last, before it's ruined. And in that salvage mission, men kill any tree that might contain the secret of resistance. A 5-year-old in Tennessee who sees the first orange spots appear in her magic woods will have nothing left to show her children except pictures. They'll never see the ripe, full habit of the tree, never know the sight and sound and smell of their mother's childhood. Millions of dead stumps sprout suckers that struggle on, year after year, before dying of an infection that, preserved in these stubborn shoots, will never disappear. By 1940, the fungus takes everything, all the way out to the furthest stand in southern Illinois. 4 billion trees in the native range vanish into myth. Oh, there it is. I read past it the first time. 4 billion trees in the native range vanish into myth. That's the thing. It's just one sentence, but that number. I missed that. It's just amazing. Aside from a few pockets of resistance, the only chestnuts left are those that pioneers took far away, to states beyond the reach of drifting spores. I'm just going to read that last one, just in case you didn't catch that. Aside from a few secret pockets of resistance, so trees that are still living, the only chestnuts left are those that pioneers took far away, to states beyond the reach of drifting pores. Which brings us back to the Hoels. Okay. So Frank Hoel Jr. keeps his father's promise long after his father fades into blurry black and white, overexposed memories. Each month the boy lays another photo in the balsam box. Soon he's an adolescent, then a young man. He goes through the motions the way the extended Hoel family keeps celebrating St. Olaf's Day without remembering what it is. I don't know what it is. Interesting. Frank suffers from nothing from imagination. He can't even hear himself think. It's very possible that I hate this tree. It's very possible that I love it more than I loved my father. The thoughts can mean nothing to a man with no real independent desire, born under the thing he is chained to, and fated to die under it, too. He thinks, this thing has no business here. It's no good to anyone unless we chop it down. Then there are months when, through the viewfinder, the spreading crown seems to a surprised eye like the template for meaning itself. In summer, water rises through the xylem and disperses out of the million tiny mouths on the undersides of leaves. 100 gallons a day evaporate from the tree's airy crown into the humid Iowa air. In the fall, the yellowing leaves fill Frank Jr. with a nostalgia. In winter, bare branches click and hum above the drifts, their blunt resting buds almost sinister with waiting. But for a moment each spring, the pale green catkins and cream-colored flowers put thoughts into Frank Jr.'s head, though he doesn't know how to have. Thoughts that he doesn't know how to have. The third Hoel photographer keeps on taking pictures, just as he keeps going to church long after deciding that the entire faithful world has been duped by fairy tales. His pointless photographic ritual gives Frank Jr.'s life a blind purpose that even farming cannot give. It's a monthly exercise in noticing a thing worth no notice at all, a creature as steadfast and reticent as life. The stack of photos hits the 500 mark during World War II. Frank Jr. stops one afternoon to flip through the pictures. He himself feels like the same boy who made an ill-advised promise to his father at the age of 9. But the time-lapse tree has changed beyond all recognition. When all the mature trees in the chestnut's native range are gone, the Hoel tree becomes a curiosity. A dendrologist in Iowa City comes out to confirm the rumor. A chestnut that escaped the Holocaust. A journalist from the Register, it's like a magazine, I guess, or something. A journalist from the Register, capitalized, does a feature on one of the last of America's perfect trees. More than 1,200 places east of the Mississippi have the word chestnut in it. But you have to come to a rural country in western Iowa to lay eyes on one. Ooh. Ordinary people driving between New York and San Francisco on the new interstate that cuts a channel alongside the Hoel farm see only a fountain of shade in the lone and level expanse of corn and soy. In the bitter cold of February 1965, the number 2 brownie cracks. Frank Jr. replaces it with an Instamatic. The stack grows thicker than any book he has ever tried to read, but each photo in the sheaf shows only that lone tree, struggling off the staggering emptiness that the man knows so well. The farm is to Frank Jr.'s back. The farm is to Frank Jr.'s back each time he opens the lens. The photo hides everything. The 20s that do not roar for the Hoels. The depression that cost them 200 acres and sent half the family to Chicago. The radio shows that ruined 2 of Frank Jr.'s sons for farming. The Hoel's death in the South Pacific, and the 2 Hoel guilty survivals. The Dearies and caterpillars parading through the tractor shed, the barn that burns to the ground one night to the scream of helpless animals, the dozens of joyous weddings, christenings, and graduations, the half-dozen adulteries, the 2 divorces sad enough to silence songbirds, one son's unsuccessful campaign for the Slate legislature, the lawsuit between the cousins, the 3 surprise pregnancies, the protracted Hoel guerrilla war against the local pastor and the half-Lutheran parish, the handiwork of heroin and Agent Orange that comes home with the nephews from Nam, the hushed-up incest, the lingering alcoholism, a daughter's elopement with the high school English teacher, the cancers, breast, colon, lung, the heart disease, the degloving of a worker's fist in a grain auger, the car death of a cousin's child on prom night, the countless tons of chemicals with names like Rage, Roundup, and Firestorm, the patented seeds engineered to produce sterile plants, the 50th wedding anniversary in Hawaii and its disastrous aftermath, The dispersal of retirees to Arizona and Texas, the generations of grudge, courage, forbearance, and surprise generosity. Everything a human being might call the story happens outside of his photo frame. Inside the frame, through hundreds of revolving seasons, there is only one solo tree. Its fissured bark spiraling upwards into the early Middle Age, growing at the speed of wood. Extinction speeds up on the Hoel farm, on all the family farms in western Iowa. The tractors grow too monstrous, the railroad cars full of nitrogen fertilizer too expensive, the competition too large and efficient, the margins too marginal, the soil too worn by repeated row cropping to be able to even make a profit. Each year, another neighbor is swallowed up into the massive, managed, relentlessly productive monocrop factories. Like humans everywhere in the face of catastrophe, Frank Hoel Jr. goes blinking into his fate. He takes on debt. He sells off acreage and rights. He signs deals with the seed companies that he shouldn't. Next year, he's sure. Next year, something will come along to save him, as it always has. All told, Frank Jr. adds 755 photos, 755, of the solitary giant to the 160 that his father and grandfather shot. On the 21st day of last April of his life, on the last April of his life, with Frank Jr. confined to bed, his son Eric travels out to the farm from his home 40 minutes away and sets up on the rise to snap yet one more black and white, now filled to the frame with exuberant branches. Eric shows the print to the old man. It's easier than trying to tell his father he loves him. Frank Jr. grimaces at a taste like bitter almonds. Listen, I made a promise and I keep it. You don't owe nobody. Leave that damn thing be. He might as well command the giant chestnut itself to stop spreading. 3/4 of a century dances by in a 5-second flip. Nick Hoel thumbs through the stack of 1,000 photos, watching for those decades' secret meeting. At 25, he's back for a moment on the farm where he spent every Christmas of his life. He's lucky to be there, given the cancellations. Snowstorms sweep in from the west, grounding planes all over the country. He and his folks have driven out to be with his grandmother. Tomorrow, more family will arrive from all over the state. With a flip through the photos, the farm memories come back to him. The holidays of his childhood, the entire clan gathering for turkey or carols, midsummer flags and fireworks. It's all encoded somehow in that animated tree. The gatherings of each season, joining his cousins for days of exploration and corn-bound boredom. Flipping backwards through the photos, Nicholas feels the years peel off like steamed wallpaper. Always the animals. First the dogs, especially the 3-legged ones. Half wild with affection every time Nick's family pulled into the long gravel drive. Then the horse's hot breath and the stiff shock of cows' bristles. Snakes threading the harvested stalks. Stumbling on rabbits' nests down by the mailbox. One July, half-feral cats emerging from under the front porch, smelling of mystery and curdled milk. The small gifts of dead mice on the farm's back doorstep. The 5-second film triggers primal scenes. Prowling the machine shed with its engines and arcane tools. Sitting in the crowded kitchen, breathing in the moldy, cracked linoleum while squirrels thumped in their hidden nests behind the wall studs. digging for hours with two younger cousins, their antiqued pair handle shovels, cutting a trench down into what Nick promised would soon be a magum. He sits upstairs at the roll-top desk in his dead grandfather's study, sampling a project that outlasted 4 generations of its makers. Of all the cargo packed into the Hoel farmhouse, the 100 cookie jars and glass snow globes, the attic box containing his father's old report cards, the foot-pumped bellow organ rescued from the church where his great-grandfather was baptized, his father's and uncle's archaic toys, polished pine skittle bowing pins, and an incredible city run by magnets underneath the streets. This stack of photos has always been the one farm treasure he would never get enough of. Each picture on its own shows nothing but the tree he climbed so often he could do it blind. But flipping through, a Corinthian column of wood smells under his thumb, rousing itself and shaking free. 3/4 of a century run by in the time it takes to say grace. Once, as a 9-year-old, on the farm for Easter dinner, Nick rifled through the stack so many times that his grandfather cuffed him and hid the pictures away on the highest shelf of the mothballed closet. Nick was up on the chair and into the stack again as soon as the adults were safely downstairs. It's his birthright, the whole emblem. No other family in the county had a tree like the Hoel tree, and no other family in Iowa could match the multi-generation photo project for pure weirdness. And yet the adults seemed sworn never to say where the project was going. Neither his grandparents nor his father could explain to him the point of the flip book. His grandfather said, "I promised my father, and he promised his." But another time from the same man makes you think differently about things, don't it? And it did. The farm was where Nick first started sketching. The pencil dreams of boys, rockets, outlandish cars, massed armies, imagined cities, and more Baroque with detail each year. The wilder textures directly observed, the forest of hairs on a caterpillar's back, and the stormy weather maps in the grain of floorboards. It was at the farm, drunk on the flip book, that he first started to sketch branches. He lay on his back on the 4th of July, looking up into the spreading tree while everyone else pitched horseshoes. There was a geometry to this constant splitting, a balance to the various thicknesses and lengths that lay behind his powers as an artist to reveal. Sketching, he wondered what his brain would have to be like to distinguish each of the hundreds of lancet leaves on a given branch and recognize them as easily as he did the faces of his cousins. One more flip through the magic movie, and faster than it takes for the black and white broccoli to turn up again to the sky-probing giant, the 9-year-old, cuffed by his grandfather, turns into a teen, falls in love with God, prays to God nightly but rarely successfully to keep from masturbating to visions of Shelley Harper, grows away from God and toward the guitar, gets busted for half a joint of pot, is sentenced to 6 months in a juvie, scared straight-face facility at Cedar Rapids, and there, sketching for hours at a shot of everything he can see through his steel-webbed dorm room window, realizes that he needs to spend his life making strange things. He was sure the idea would be hard to sell. Hoels were farmers, feed store owners, and farm equipment salesmen like his father. Violently practical people, grounded in the logic of land, and driven to work long, relentless days, year after year, without ever asking why. And Nick prepared himself for a showdown, something out of the D.H. Lawrence novels that helped him survive high school. He practiced for weeks, choking on the absurdity of the request. "Dad, I would very much like to plunge off the edge of common sense existence at your expense and become certifiably unemployable." He chose an early spring night. His father lay on a divan on the screened-in porch, as he did most nights, reading a biography of Douglas MacArthur. Nicholas sat in the recliner next to him. Sweet breezes blew in through the screen and uncombed his hair. Dad, I need to go to art school. His father looked at him over the top of his book like he was gazing out on the ruins of his lineage. I figured it would be something like that. And Nick was gone, reeled out on a leash long enough to reach the Chicago Loop, with the freedom to test all the flaws inherent in his own desire. At school in Chicago, Nick learned many things. Number one, human history was the story of increasingly disoriented hunger. Number two, art was nothing he thought it was. Number three, people would make just about anything you could think they could make. Intricate, scrimshawed portraits on the tips of penciled leads, polyurethane-coated dog shit, earthworks that could pass for small nations. Number four, he learned in art school. Makes you think differently about things, don't it? His cohort laughed at his little pencil sketches and hyperreal Trompelet oil paintings. Definitely pronouncing that wrong. Sorry. But he kept making them season after season. And by his third year, he became notorious, even cattily admired. Winter night of senior year, in his rented broom closet in Rogers Park, he had a dream. A woman student he loved asked him, "What is it that you really want to make?" He barred his hands to the sky, shrugging. Tiny wells of blood pooled up in the center of his palms. Up from those pools grew two branching spines. He thrashed in a panic, back up to consciousness. Half an hour passed before his heart slowed enough for him to realize that where those spines came from. The time-lapse picture of the chestnut his gypsy Norwegian great-great-great-grandfather planted 120 years before, while self-enrolled in that correspondence school of primitive art, the plains of western Iowa. Just a few more pages here. Nick sits at the roll top, flipping once more through the book. Last year, he won the Stern Prize for sculpture from the School of Art Institute. This year, he's a stock boy for a famous Chicago department store that has been dying a slow death for a quarter of a century. Granted, he has earned a degree that licenses him to make peculiar artifacts capable of embarrassing his friends and angering strangers. There's a "You Store It" in Oak Park crammed with papier-mâché costumes for street masks and surreal sets for a show that ran in a little theater near Andersonville and closed 3 nights later. But at 25, the scion of a long line of farmers wants to believe that his best work might still be ahead of him. It's the day before Christmas Eve. Hoel's will descend in massive tomorrow, but his grandmother is already in hog heaven. She lives for days like these, when the old drafty house fills up with its descendants. There's no farm anymore, just the house on its island rise. All the Hoel land is long-term leased to outfits run from offices hundreds of miles away. The Iowa earth has been brought to its rationalized end. But for a while, for this holiday, the place will be all miracle births and saviors in mangers, as it was at Hoel Christmases for 120 years running. Nick heads downstairs. It's mid-morning, and his grandmother, father, and mother huddle around the kitchen where the pecan rolls flow and the dominoes are already getting worn down to those little chiclets. Outside, the cold dips well below bitter. To counter the polar north winds pouring through the cedar-sided walls, Eric Hoel has cranked up the old propane space heater. There's a fire blazing in the fireplace. Food enough to feed the 5,000. Food enough to feed the 5,000. 5,000 what? There's a fire blazing in the fireplace. Food enough to feed the 5,000 and a new TV as big as Wyoming turned to a football game no one cares about. Nicholas says, "Who's up for Omaha?" There's an American landscapes exhibit at the Jocelyn Museum, only an hour away. When he pitched the idea the night before, the old folks seemed interested. Now they look away. His mother smiles, embarrassed for him. "I'm feeling a little fluish, honey." His father adds, "We're all pretty cozy, Nick." His grandmother nods in woozy agreement. "Okay," Nicholas says. "Heck with all you. I'll be back for dinner." Snow blows across the interstate while more is falling. But he's a Midwesterner, and his father wouldn't be his father without putting virgin snow tires on the car. The American Landscape Show is spectacular. The Sheelers alone send Nick into fits of jealous gratitude. He stays until the museum kicks him out. When he leaves, it's dark, and the drifts swirl above his boats. He finds his way back onto the interstate and creeps east. The road is whited out. All the drivers foolish enough to attempt traveling cling to one another's taillights in slow procession through the white. The rut Nick plows has only the most abstract relation to the lane beneath. The shoulder's rumble strip is so muffled by snow he can't hear it. Under a viaduct, he hits a sheet of frictionless ice. The car slaloms sideways. He surrenders to the freestyle slide, coaxing the car like a kite until it's straightened. He slips his high beams on and off, trying to decide which is less blinding against the snowy curtain. After an hour, he has gone almost 20 miles. A scene unfolds in the snow-black tunnel like a night vision clip from a cop documentary. An oncoming 18-wheeler jackknifes into the medium and swings around like a wounded animal, popping up on Nick's side 100 yards in front of him. He swerves past the wreck and slides off onto the right shoulder. The right rear of the car bounces off the guardrail. His front left bumper kisses the truck's rear tire. He skids to a stop and starts shaking so hard he can't steer. The car edges into a rest area, crawling with stranded motorists. There's a payphone in the toilets. He calls the house, but the call won't go through. Night before Christmas Eve, and the phone lines are down all over the state. He's sure his parents must be worried sick, but the only sane thing to do is to curl up in the car and sleep for a couple of hours until everything blows over and the plows catch up with God's shit fit. He's back on the road a little before dawn. The snow is mostly stopped, and the cars creep by in both directions. He crawls home. The hardest part of the drive is climbing the little rise at the end of the interstate exit. He fishtails up the ramp and turns onto the road back to the farm. The way is drifted over. The Hoel chestnut appears from a long way off, piled up in white, the only spire all the way down to the horizon. 2 small lights shine from the house and the upstairs window. He can't imagine what anyone is doing up so early. Someone has waited up all night for him. The road to the house is piled high in snow. His grandfather's old truck plow is still in the shed. His father should have run it down and back at least a couple of times by now. Nick fights the drifts, but they're too small. He leaves the car halfway up the drive and walks the last stretch to the house. Pushing through the front door, he bursts out singing, "Oh, the weather outside is frightful." But there's no one downstairs to laugh. Later he'll wonder whether he knew it already. There in the front doorway. But no. He must walk around to the foot of the stairs where his father is lying, head downward and arms bent at impossible angles, praising the floor. Nick shouts and drops to help his father, but there's nothing left to help. He stands and takes the stairs, 2 at a time. But by now, everything is as clear as Christmas, everything anyone needs to know. Upstairs, the two women curl up in their bedrooms and can't be wakened. A late morning sleep-in on Christmas Eve. Blur rises up his legs and torso. He's drowning in pitch. He runs back downstairs where the old propane heater still cranks away, venting gas that rises and pools invisibly underneath the ceiling that Nick's father has so recently snugged up with extra insulation. Nick blunders through the front door, trips down the porch steps, and falls into the snow. He rolls over in the freezing white, gasping and reviving. When he looks up, it's into the branches of the Sentinel tree, lone, huge, fractal, and bare against the drifts, lifting its lower limbs and shrugging its ample globe. All its profligate twigs click in the breeze, as if this moment, too, so insignificant, so transitory, will be written into its rings and prayed over by the branches that wave their semaphores against the bluest of Midwestern winter skies. All right, I hope you enjoyed this reading of the first chapter from the Overstory. Like I said, the book starts with 8 short stories, and it's only kind of over time that you discover the interrelation between all of these characters. So I hope if you enjoyed it, you keep reading. One thing I'll just share, which I found really interesting, is there was an interview that I listened to with Richard Powers at Shakespeare and Company online, and he was asked who the evil was in the book, because a lot of books, have a theme of some kind of evil, right? There's like an evil character, an evil villain, right? Or there's even like an evil within inside of you, something you're trying to escape. In this book, there's a conflict between man and nature. It seems to be the two sides of the struggle in a way. And he was asked about the evil, and he said, if there's any evil, so this is a quote, if there's any evil in the Overstory, it's the small part in all of us that takes miracles for granted. And I found that so beautiful. That is just so well said about climate change, really, or any kind of obstacle in our lives that's greater than any one of us, that we all have to join together to understand, because in a way I almost want to say ignorance, but I think the way that he said it is just the ability of us not to take miracles for granted, which in the Overstory would be the wonder of trees, the wonder of nature, and what they give us and all that we get from them. And in this book, I think through these characters, you see what's at stake in the story if we continue to neglect that. I guess I'll just leave it at that. And I think it goes from there to just look at this first chapter, which was about the relationship of this tree over time, and then it just kind of ripples out like water to how this one story affects so many different people's lives, and it's really nice. So I hope you enjoyed that. Okay, well, this has been another episode of the podcast about books, and there's other episodes that are all free and you can download or listen to on Spotify or YouTube, and you can listen to books on Letters to a Young Poet, Mating in Captivity, Sapiens. There's a ton of other books that you can just go and check out if you'd like to check those out as well. If you have any questions for me, you can reach me, Chris at on-books.com. Shoot me a line, and I hope you're doing really well. That's it. Talk to you soon. Enjoy.